Hola a todos, soy Javier Poveda y esto es De Bien TV, el canal en el que te lo vas a pasar de bien mientras aprendes geografía, historia, historia del arte y un poquito de economía y empresariales, pero solo este año. Este vídeo va dirigido a mis alumnos de cuarto de la ESO de sección del CEIPSO El Encinar de Torrelodones. In this video we are going to finish the second unit of our textbook with the second part, which is the Napoleonic Empire and the Spanish War of Independence, la guerra de independencia española en cristiano. So let's go with some of our magic to the presentation. Here we are, this is our unit, and this is the second part, the Napoleonic Empire and the Spanish War of Independence. So we ended the last video with the consulate of Napoleon. He was named consul in 1799 after the coup of 18 Brumaire, and he was named first consul for life in 1802. Finally, in 1804, he was named Emperor of the French as Napoleon I. So his main political achievements were the following. In relating to his domestic policy, he consolidated the changes made during the revolution. Even though he was an emperor, he didn't come back to the features of the ancient regime. He established the civil code, which was a set of laws that applied equally to all citizens. Look that he's following the principles of the Enlightenment. It introduced new concepts such as civil marriage, divorce, adoption, and, very important, state-controlled education. And this civil code today is the basis of most of the civil codes of the modern European countries. That is why it is very important. And regarding his foreign policy, he made France an empire. Why? As a result of his victories over Austria, Russia, and Prussia. He defeated them all, and he defeated them all alone. He is a god. He's our best military leader. I love him. So, Great Britain was the fourth power in Europe, and they were the only ones who weren't defeated by Napoleon. Why? Because they were in an island. So what did Napoleon do? He established the continental blockade, el bloqueo continental. This means that no country allied with or occupied by France was allowed to import British goods. So he was trying to suffocate, economically speaking, Great Britain. He didn't achieve it, but he tried. What was the dream of Napoleon? He wanted to create a united Europe under the feet of France. It should be made up of kingdoms that were dependent on France. That is why he appointed his family, his brothers, for example, in the main European thrones. For example, in Spain. We will see that later. This is the Code Civil des Français. My French is horrible, I know. And this is the map of Europe in 1812, okay? This, in purple, we have the French territory, including some annexations, for example, the Dutch, the Low Countries, in Catalonia, and many parts of Italy. And in color in blue, I mean, we have. Oh my God, I cannot speak. Today is Friday evening, and I cannot concentrate. So in blue, we have the countries that were controlled or allied with Napoleon. Okay, so all this red line here, including Spain and Italy, are the countries, include the countries that were in alliance with Napoleon, with the French Empire. And this is part of the Paris architecture, the Arc de Triomphe, el Arco del Triunfo de París, which was built by Napoleon to celebrate his victories all over Europe. So, From 1812 onwards, Napoleon's military power began to decline. Why? Because he tried to invade Russia. He went to Moscow, he burnt the Kremlin, but in the retreat, he had to retreat because the supplies weren't, the supply line was a problem for this invasion because it was far away from France and from his allies. So he had to retreat, losing a lot of men. And this meant that the Allies started a new offensive, and Napoleon was defeated in the Battle of Leipzig in 1813 by a coalition formed by Sweden, Austria, Prussia, and Russia. This was the Battle of the Nations. So he was forced to abdicate and was exiled to the island of Elba, which is in the coast of Italy. But he returned to France in the year 1814, and he regained power, and he was again the emperor of the French. He raised an army and went again to the war with the Allies, but this time he was defeated again in the famous Battle of Waterloo in Belgium in 1815. So he had to definitely abdicate, and he was exiled this time to St. Helena, which is a British island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. He finally died there in 1821. This is the Battle of Leipzig, the Battle of the Nations. This is Napoleon's return from Elba. He was acclaimed by the French people and by the French army. And this is the Battle of Waterloo. This is the exile, this is the exile of Napoleon in St. Helena, and this is the tomb of Napoleon in Les Invalides, Los Inválidos in Paris. A very beautiful, exceptionally beautiful place that I recommend you to visit. So what were the consequences of the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Empire? Well, the most important one, the fall of the Ancien Regime. The main political changes were the following: the new forms of government, such as the constitutional monarchy and the republic, the new constitutions that appeared in Europe, and also the political parties in which the bourgeoisie started to participate in politics. Also, regarding the economy, now all citizens had to pay tax and contribute towards the state's expenses. And also the law guaranteed free trade and the respect for private property. Remember that the bourgeoisie was this social class, very wealthy social class that dominated the trade during the Ancien Regime. And finally, regarding the social changes, the estates system disappeared. Okay, the serfs were replaced by the citizens, and now everyone was now equal before the law. And also, as I said before, since the introduction of the male suffrage, the bourgeoisie was able to participate in politics since this moment. And now let's talk about Spain in English. Yes. So the king in Spain during this time was Carlos IV, whose reign began in 1788. He was the son of Carlos III. And his most important minister, su valido, was Manuel Godoy, who is this guy here, very handsome guy. This is Carlos IV. And in 1793, Spain joined the first coalition against France as a result of Louis XVI execution. Remember, 21st January 1793. However, we were defeated by the French, and we had to sign a peace treaty with the French in 1795, which is called the Peace of Basel, La Paz de Basilea. That year, Godoy allied with France against Great Britain. Since this year, we started to be allied to France, and we went to the war against the United Kingdom. What were the consequences of this alliance? The following. We signed the treaties of San Ildefonso. Two treaties, the first one 1796, the second one 1800 or 1800, okay, or 1800. I don't know how to say that year. in which Spain promised to help France in an invasion to Great Britain. Why? Because we still had a great fleet. What happened? That the English defeated us, both French and the Spanish, in the famous Battle of Trafalgar, which is near the coast of Cádiz. And also, after that, several years later, in 1807, we signed the Treaty of Fontainebleau, which allowed the French troops to cross Spain to invade Portugal. Why did the French want to invade Portugal? Because Portugal refused to establish the continental blockade, the one that we talked before. Remember? The prohibition to import goods from Great Britain. Since the Portuguese are allied to the British, since the 14th or 13th century, so they refused to obey Napoleon, so the French crossed Spain in order to occupy Portugal. But what happened? That the French also took advantage of this, and also occupied most of Spain. This is the Battle of Trafalgar. Hay que leer a Galdós, recordad. So, what happened? Godoy was afraid that the French may imprison the royal family, the Spanish royal family. So he tried to move the Spanish royal family, Carlos IV and his family, to Sevilla. So first they moved to Aranjuez, to the palace of Aranjuez. But what happened? That there was a popular revolt in March 1808, which is known as the Revolt of Aranjuez. En cristiano, el motín de Aranjuez. This forced Carlos IV to dismiss Godoy and to abdicate in favor of his son Fernando VII. Later, 2 months later, in May 1808, Fernando VII and his father Carlos IV were moved to Bayonne in France, and there they renounced their rights to the Spanish throne in favor of Napoleon. They were tricked to abdicate in Napoleon. What did he do? He appointed his brother, José, as the King of Spain, José I Bonaparte. This event is known as las abdicaciones de Bayona. Although most of Spain's population rejected the new king, José I Bonaparte, had some support. The Spanish people who supported José I Bonaparte were called los afrancesados. And this is a picture of el motín de Aranjuez. This is Fernando VII, also known as El Deseado, and this is José I Bonaparte as the King of Spain. And then here we start with the Spanish War of Independence. This war started in 1808 and finished in 1814, not in 1813 as the textbook says. The textbook lies. When did it start? In the 2nd of May of 1808, when the people of Madrid rose up against the French occupation, and then the war started. In all throughout all the territory of Spain, local and provincial councils, las juntas, were formed to fight against the French, whose members were elected by the people. And these committees were led by a superior junta, or in English, the Central Council, en cristiano, la Junta Suprema Central, which represented the absent Fernando VII, remember he was in France, in areas that had not been occupied by the French, mostly the south of Spain. So we can recognize 3 phases in this Spanish War of Independence. First, the first year, our army won several victories, including the Battle of Bailén. Bailén is the first defeat, the first major defeat in an open field battle for the Napoleonic army, okay, for the Grande Armée. Okay, this is very important, and this stopped the French from occupying Andalucía, the south of Spain. Between 1808 and 1812, the guerrilla warfare began. Las guerrillas empezaron. Napoleon had to come to Spain to oversee the French occupation. He himself had to come to Spain to lead the French army because they were being defeated by the Spanish army and by the guerrilla. But finally, the French managed to occupy all of Spain except for Cádiz. Why? Because we were protected by the British fleet there. And then, the last years, in 1812 and 1813, the Central Council signed a military alliance with Great Britain. The English landed here in Spain, and with the help of the Portuguese also, we forced the French to withdraw from Spain. This army was commanded by the Duke of Wellington, el Duque de Wellington. And the French had to retire from Spain, had to withdraw from Spain in 1813. But the war continued until the year 1814 in French territory. So Fernando VII could come back to Spain and return to the throne. This is Agustina de Aragón, which was a heroine of the war. This is el 2 de mayo en Madrid de Francisco de Goya, en concreto la carga de los mamelucos, and this is Malasaña y su hija batiéndose contra los franceses. Manuela Malasaña is this woman here who lies dead, and this is his father, who was a baker. Okay, and they were heroes of the revolt of 2 de mayo in Madrid. Also, some of the Spanish troops that were in Madrid also revolted versus the French, but only the ones in el Parque de Artillería de Monteleón y en concreto los capitanes Daoiz y Velarde, que fueron masacrados. And this is la Plaza del 2 de Mayo en Madrid, donde se conmemora esta hazaña hoy en día. Esto lo digo en castellano porque es que es absurdo decirlo en inglés. Lo siento mucho. The next day, many people were shot by the French in Príncipe Pío. This is the painting of Goya. The Battle of Bailén. This is the French commander surrendering to the Spanish. And these are most of the most important guerrilleros of the Spanish War of Independence. Espocimina, Juan Martín, llamado el Empecinado, y el cura Merino. So, in the meantime, we have to talk about the Cádiz Cortes, las Cortes de Cádiz. So, the Central Council, la Junta Suprema Central, took refuge in Cádiz from the advancing French troops. Remember when Napoleon came to Spain. In 1810, it called the Cádiz Cortes, las Cortes de Cádiz, in which each deputy or representative of the Spanish people had an individual vote. So, the bourgeoisie in this time were well represented. There were different groups, but we can distinguish two main groups. First, the supporters of the Enlightenment ideas. They wanted to end the Ancien Régime in Spain and also to establish a constitutional monarchy, similar to the one that had been established in France in the year 1791. And on the other hand, we have the absolutists who wanted the king to be restored as an absolute monarch. Okay, they wanted the things to be as before. And the most important thing that happened during the Cádiz Cortes was the approval of the Constitution of 1812, la Constitución de Cádiz de 1812, which was the first Spanish constitution, also called La Pepa. Why? Because it was signed on March 19th, el Día del Padre, el Día de San José, La Pepa. It was a victory for the Enlightenment ideas of liberty and equality, of course. Why? Because it established the following principles: a constitutional monarchy, the popular sovereignty with male suffrage, limited, but male suffrage, the separation of powers, although the king had the executive power and he shared the legislative power with the parliament, with las Cortes, and also a judicial power with the courts of justice. It also established guaranteed rights and freedoms, such as equality before the law, the right to privacy, and the freedom of press, among others. But they had to, in order to have the support of the absolutists, they have to establish the Catholicism as the official state religion. This is facsimile which is now kept in the Senate in Spain, in Madrid. This is the signing of the approval of la promulgación, vaya, de la Constitución Española de 1812, de la Pepa, famoso cuadro de Viniegra. And we are already done here, but the main artistic style that was used during this time, during the end of the 18th and the beginning of the 19th centuries, was the neoclassicism, which is an artistic style in which the classical language is restored, or more or less it's again used. And we have several pieces of art, for example, Jacques-Louis David, which is my idol, the Oath of the Horati, el juramento de los Horacios, the Death of Socrates, la muerte de Sócrates, he poisoned himself, if you know, the Intervention of the Sabine Woman, el rapto de las Sabinas, which is a mythical episode of the history of Rome, the early history of Rome, Napoleon crossing the Alps, the death of Marat. Marat was a supporter of the revolution and a friend of Jacques-Louis David. Also in sculpture we have Antonio Canova, que también es Dios, Eros and Psyche, or Cupid and Psyche, Theseus and the Minotaur, Venus Victrix, which is a portrait of Paulina Bonaparte, the sister of Napoleon. And in architecture we have these amazing buildings which evoke us the Greek temples, for example, La Madeleine in Paris, Les Invalides in Paris also, el Museo del Prado en Madrid de Juan de Villanueva, que es neoclásico. And that's it. Louis XVI, adieu. Magic backwards, here we are. And that's it for the Unit 2. Muchas gracias si te has quedado hasta el final y, como siempre, nos vamos con una frase guapa. Que nos lo llevan, gritó el pueblo de Madrid el 2 de mayo de 1808. Este fue el grito que fue el detonante de la revuelta del levantamiento del 2 de mayo de 1808, cuando un señor cerrajero, José de Blanes, algo así, no recuerdo bien, gritó que nos lo llevan al ver que los franceses se llevaban a Bayona al último miembro de la familia real que quedaba en España, que era el infante Francisco de Paula, en la Plaza Oriente de Madrid. Después de ese grito, los españoles, armados con navajas, piedras y las pocas armas que había, se enfrentaron a la Guardia Imperial Francesa y pues nos masacraron. Pero eso fue la chispa que detonó la Guerra de Independencia Española. Muchas gracias por ver este vídeo y nos vemos en el próximo.